If you want to feel more connected to humanity and a little less alone, listen to Beautiful Anonymous. Each week, I take a phone call from one random anonymous human being. There's over 400 episodes in our back catalog. You get to feel connected to all these different people all over the world. Recent episodes include one where a lady survived a murder attempt by her own son. But then the week before that, we just talked about Star Trek. It can be anything. It's unpredictable. It's raw. It's real. Get Beautiful Anonymous wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Energy to Heal podcast. My name is Alora, and I've got a special guest for you guys today. I keep hearing feedback from my podcast episodes. You guys love the stories, and I love that so much because that's what brought me to Splankna. That's what brought me to continue wanting to do this podcast is the stories, this inner healing modality that feels so simple, almost too good to be true, and literal just miracles are happening. I feel like my job as a Splankna practitioner is I get to sit and watch God do miracles in people's lives right in front of me. And I can't imagine ever getting tired of it or ever getting tired of hearing the stories. So the fact that you guys want to hear the stories too is the best. So I have Heather Hughes on with me. She is a very involved person with Splankna and has been around the Splankna world for so long, to the point where today we're going to be talking about generational traumas, generational curses, strongholds that keep showing up in families and how to break them. And then following this, we're going to do an episode on addiction. And Heather is so familiar, so rooted in this modality that she is the one that has helped form and make and create these different modalities, these different protocols with the Lord. So Heather, thank you for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Can you go ahead? I know you've been on the podcast before, but as we've mentioned recently, we've had to just kind of delete a bunch of episodes. And so we're kind of treating this like a refresh. For those people who are new, they didn't hear your previous episodes. Can you just give us an introduction of who you are, what you do, how you got into Splankna, all the introduction stuff?
Sure. So again, my name's Heather Hughes. I got into Splankna before Splankna was named Splankna. So
that's saying something.
Yeah, I was going to Sarah as a client back when she was kind of developing the core of this protocol. And I just kept saying to Sarah, like, you cannot be the only one who's doing this. It's just too good. And I had my first child around that time, and I was seeing so much fruit in the work with him. And I had so much fruit from growing up with a pretty traumatic childhood and extreme poverty. And just a lot of that took a toll on my body. And I was receiving physical healing by dealing with the emotional stuff that I was just so impressed with this protocol and feeling so much better. But also, I think I mentioned in the other one, I was a fairly new believer. Like, I grew up always knowing Jesus and feeling close to him, but really kind of accepted him and started to learn a lot more in my early 20s, 20 actually. And so I had been going to Sarah, and one of the things that really convinced me that Splankna was from the Lord was that I had gone to her and said, everybody talks about a personal relationship with Jesus. And I feel like they're just saying that to sound holy, because how can you have a personal relationship with somebody you can't feel or see or hear? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. And Sarah was like, well, we need to fix that. So we prayed and we did Splankna, and, part of that trauma went back, or the traumas I feel like that really impacted my relationship with God was my childhood and all the abuse that I went through and not feeling like God was there for me. And I don't know, I can't remember the details of the session, but I remember it was, where was God when all of this was happening? And even though I don't have all of those answers, something healed in me, and my relationship with Jesus is exactly how other people described it. Like, this personal relationship where I can feel him and I can hear him and I feel his spirit in me and the way it works. So it's really cool. We wrote a lot about that in Upper Dogs, I think, about that journey. And so that really convinced me that Splankna was from the Lord. And then over the years of doing Splankna, having so many clients who turn their lives back to God, they want to read their Bible, they want to go to church. And part of that is because when you're doing this intimate work and you know that the Lord is behind this, and the Lord is the only one who really knows your trauma. And when he brings, you ask him in that opening prayer, God, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And he takes you to like that one thing that you've never told anybody, or the thing that really blocks you from intimacy with him or others or your calling. And you see how much he loves you and how personal he is. That just draws you to him. And that's one of the things I love about Splankna. And that's what happened for me. So finally, Sarah, go ahead.
Pause you there. And I'm so glad that you brought up the book Upper Dogs, because we talk about the book Splankna a lot, for an audience who's trying to figure out what is Splankna, how does it work? But we have not touched on that book Upper Dogs. So I just want to if you've read the Splankna book and you're ready for more, you want to hear more, Heather and Sarah have written a book together called Upper Dogs. And it is and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've read it, but it's like this concept of we are not the underdogs in the spiritual world. If you're a child of the Most High King, that means you're on the winning team. That means you carry the authority of Christ with you wherever you go, into every single battle, every single spiritual warfare. And what does that mean to live as if you're on the winning team instead of always trying to run away from the enemy or protect yourself always from the enemy? And it's an amazing, amazing read.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we had a lot of fun writing it. And I think our goal when we wrote Upper Dogs is that, Splankna is kind of an apologetic and really has a lot of explaining of New Age and witchcraft and energy work and all of this stuff. Whereas Upper Dogs, we wanted it to be a book that anyone could read. And that even if you're not interested in Splankna, but you just want to grow in your authority and understanding. But there is a chapter in there that explains Splankna too, and how we partner with him in that way, and other people partner with him in other ways, which is great.
Yeah. Can I ask, how long was okay, so you're I keep hearing people talk about how awesome God is, and it's making me frustrated because I think they're all trying to be fake and holy. How long was your journey of doing Splankna before you started to notice I feel different? I think I might actually feel God loves me, his presence, something's changing in me.
It's hard to remember because that was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But I feel like it was almost instant. It was like I said, every Splankna session is an intimate experience with the Lord. If you choose to see it that way and you see what he's doing and so I feel like it was pretty quick, honestly. I feel like I was thrown into the deep end of understanding the spiritual realm and just finding intimacy with the Lord, I would say. But it's also a progression too. So I could feel the connection, but it took me a while before I actually could really hear his voice. And so I think it's a process. And for me, that process, I think from the time that happened to the time that I really felt oh my gosh, I just heard God's voice and he confirmed it, I fleeced him. That was probably in 2004, which is actually when I had started applying Splankna, and it was a personal thing between me and him. And I think it was 98. So about 5 years maybe of growing before I was really able to hear. And then,
wow.
Yeah. I think I heard him in different ways, but this time I heard him so directly.
Yeah. I feel like I get that question a lot. Okay, I want to start Splankna. How long should I anticipate needing to do sessions for? And that is so hard to answer because it's it depends on how much trauma you have in your history. It depends on how often you're coming. And I don't know why, but sometimes something gets untangled in one session and it's oh my word. And sometimes it's layers, and oftentimes it's layers.
Well, honestly, the whole intimacy thing was one session. That day after we did that session, I felt different about God.
Wow.
It just took, but I think the progression of growing and how to hear and feel and sense him takes time sometimes, but that's That's for everybody, but like healing, yeah, I don't know. I could go on and on. I have so
Yeah,
many
and it probably
stories
was
of
different
like,
levels. It's hard to like pinpoint when you would consider yourself healed. It's
yeah,
not like
exactly. It depends on when you're going, what you're going in for. There was one day I went into Sarah in the beginning with really like a pinched nerve in my back, and I had gone to the emergency room and they said it was chronic and nothing you could do about it. This was in those beginning days, like it was right after my second one was born. And I went into Sarah and we did Splankna and I walked out pain free because it was
oh, that's wild.
100% emotional.
A pinched nerve was emotional.
Yeah.
Or
Mm-hmm.
did they label it as a pinched nerve and it actually wasn't?
Well,
It was
what
just
was, no, it was because the muscles were swollen and pinching the nerves. And so once we cleared the emotional trigger behind it, the muscles were able to relax and stop being swollen, which unpinched the nerve.
that's so wild. I don't know how long I have to be a practitioner before this stuff stops shocking me that physical ailments like a pinched nerve could be addressed with Splankna, because it's so hard for me I don't know if it's because I am a nurse and I have that training of like, there is such a delineation between like, well, no, that's a physical thing.
Yeah.
But now the more I hear about it, the more I'm like, let's just try it, because who knows? A Splankna session could totally help with whatever it is that you're suffering with.
Well, and for me, that's what convinced me, because when I went to Sarah, I was having chronic back pain, chronic headaches. I had constant kidney infections. I had ulcers, and all of that was healed. And none of it was spoken directly. They were just symptoms of what was going on emotionally.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. So, sorry, I was going to finish saying, so after when Sarah finally was like, yeah, like she felt the green light from the Lord to teach this, I took her first training, and then I used the tools mostly with family and friends for a while. And then when Sarah decided to do the hotel type training, she asked me to join as someone who could answer questions because I'd been doing it for so long. And so I kind of just joined her. And then the Lord just sort of brought us together. He started like teaching me things while I was doing sessions. And then I would call Sarah and say, oh my gosh, the Lord just showed me this really cool thing in session today. And she's like, are you kidding me? He just showed me that too. And like, let's say it was the creative emotion, the way of thinking of creative emotions. And then she's like, okay, let's figure this out. And so I got to help develop some of the advanced pieces and a lot, if not all, of the master's pieces. And it's not like it was from my own mind either. It was the Lord would show me something, I would submit and like try it out. And then Sarah and I'd talk, and she'd be either doing the same thing or she'd be like, oh, that makes so much sense. And then we would turn it into protocol, because so in a lot of ways, like, I don't want to sound like, oh, I'm some kind of prophet or something, but the Lord is the one who would drop those pieces in, which we'll talk about that with addiction for sure later, because that's how that happened. Generational was all Sarah. Like, I love it and I'm passionate about it, but she developed this piece on her own.
So one thing that I love about generational, and I feel like maybe the Lord is doing this, I don't know if it's out of strategy or if it's out of kindness, but I've lately this summer had clients that are so uncomfortable with the idea of talking about emotion, feeling emotion. They have so much in their past, so much in their history, and you can just tell they sit down in my chair and it's like their mom made them be there or whatever. And they don't even want to talk about anything painful. And I'm like, oh, how is this going to go? Okay, Lord. And oftentimes in those scenarios, we go to a generational something first. And I will explain what we're doing. Hey, sometimes generational stuff can get passed down to, family to family member, generation to generation. And it's almost like, I feel like it's like the Lord really gently introducing them to this concept of Splankna, because it's not their own personal trauma. It's not their own memories coming up. It's just this concept of like, this has been something that's been with you since the beginning of your conception. And we can practice holding emotions, but it almost feels like there's a little bit of space to it between them and an actual trauma memory that they experienced.
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah. And the other thing that's kind of cool about that I didn't really think about until you were talking about that is it also is, you're not alone. you aren't the only one that feels this way. Your mom felt this way. Your grandmother felt this way. Like it's, like there's not, this is something that isn't just you. And it makes them feel like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And it's not your fault.
Right. And yet you can get freedom, so much freedom. It's so beautiful.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what is generational trauma. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have never heard anyone talk about this before.
Sure. So generational trauma, and I will put a plug in for a book that I think is helpful for this. It's called It Didn't Start With You. I can't remember the author because I don't see my copy in here right now. But It Didn't Start With You is a book about how generational trauma is passing down through the DNA. So you know how some people believe in past lives because they have memories and they think, oh, that's me from a past life. There's actually cellular memory that passes down through the DNA. And so people will have cellular memory from past generations that are impacting their life. And they've done a lot of research on epigenetics. And epigenetics is where I think they weren't mice, they were something else, but let's say mice for kicks and grins. So they took these mice and they would shock them. And every time they shocked them, they would release the smell of cherry blossoms. So cherry blossom and shock, cherry blossom and shock. So what happens over time, they smell the cherry blossom and they cringe and prepare themselves for a shock. What was interesting is that for a few generations after that original trauma, the offspring would cringe at the smell of cherry blossom, even though they never experienced the shock. And that's how generational passes. And scripture talks about how cursed to 3 to 5 generations for those who hate me and bless the thousands of generations that love me, which is so interesting because that lines up with epigenetics and how long it typically lasts. And so there's been study on ancestors of people who went through World War II and concentration camps. There's been studies of children whose parents or grandparents had been sexually abused or raped and how that impacts them. It's really interesting. You can look it up. But epigenetics is such a fascinating piece that really kind of helps understand what's happening with generational work. And so generational work is how that's passing down your bloodline. So you felt this, you feel fear whenever you are in this situation. And your mom did, and your grandma did, and it started with your great grandfather because he was in war and he was in a foxhole. Let's say like a phobia or something that's been passing down from generation to generation, even though you have no reason for it because you didn't experience anything like that. You don't have a rational reason to have that fear. It's probably like weaved into your DNA. And one of the things I love when we break a generational stronghold, we intercede, we pray for our children and all future generations, and we intercede on behalf of the rest of the bloodline. Because, we know that God honors free will and authority. So we intercede on the rest of the bloodline and ask that the Lord would apply this prayer to all of them. And so we break that stronghold and we remove any DNA patterns or cellular memory or epigenetic responses. And then we ask God to rewire them like that wasn't there. And it's really a cool process. And I can tell you stories of like how I love the stories too, of how I've seen this play out with my clients and even my own family. That's why I'm so passionate about this, because like I said, I grew up with a lot of abuse, every kind, physical, emotional, sexual, maybe not spiritual, but all of this abuse. And then, come to find out later on, my mom had the same abuse. Most likely my grandmother did too. But guess what? None of my children have, because we broke some of these generational patterns to free them from being, I guess, predispositioned for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you were the cycle breakers.
Yes, my husband and I worked really hard to change that for our children. But also God just really taught me so much, like right when I became a mom. And it's been so useful. In fact, I can tell you one of the stories if you'd like.
Yeah, yes, I'm here for all the stories.
Okay. So I I can tell you a quick story for my mom, but my daughter is the one I really want to tell you. So I was working on my mom one time, and my mom, her father was, or her grandparents, her father's parents, one was full-blooded Native American Indian, the other one was half. Well, when they got married, the family of the grandmother, who was full-blooded, kicked her out of the family because she married a half-breed. And so there's kind of the history of that. That has to do with something I worked on with Levi, actually, my youngest son. But either way, I was working on my mom one day, and what we got to was this stronghold, this belief that it's better to have nothing than to have it taken away. And that comes down that Native American line where, they had everything taken away from them. And so because my mom has always had a problem with overspending and never saving, and it's because she had this stronghold. And so she would never let herself get ahead, and she never let herself have more than, if she made $5,000 in a month, she'd spend $5,000 in a month. She always had exactly what she needed and never any extra. Does that make sense?
And that's also conscious. I want people to understand this is not a conscious decision your mom is making. This is a program running in her.
Exactly. And sometimes it wasn't even her spending it. It would be like a bill would come, or somebody would take advantage of or borrow money or not pay her back, or, whatever. And so when we broke that stronghold of like, it's better to not have anything than have it taken away, she got for the first time in her life, she got a management job instead of just, because she had been a CNA her whole life. She got a management job. And now she actually is able to have the resources she needs and have actually, for the first time in her life, a savings account.
That's wild. I don't know how many people would be like, you know what? I never can get ahead in life. I wonder if I have a generational curse over my family. Like, usually we're just like beating ourselves up. What's wrong with me? Why can't I save money? It's so good for people to hear, like, this could be something deeper than just you're bad with money.
Yeah, exactly. That could be a generational pattern. If you see a pattern coming down your bloodline, it could be something that's generational. With my daughter, so my daughter had this weird, like, when she was younger, she would argue all the time. Even if you were agreeing with her, she would argue. She would be like really unreasonable, and she would push buttons until people like wanted to hurt her. Like she even triggered like my husband's like the most easygoing, never ever reacts in anger, and Maya would trigger that in him. And he never did like harm her or anything like that. But I would just be like, oh my gosh, like, why do I get so angry? And I'd be so mad at myself for even feeling so angry. And like one time one of my younger boys was like, she does that to me too. And I was like, well, I don't understand it. And I did a lot of Splankna because I thought it was me. And then one day she was arguing with her dad, and I was totally chill. And I walked over and I was like, okay, Maya, let's talk about this. Let's work this out, like whatever. And I don't know what happened, but the next thing I know, she's wearing my tea. Like I just I blew up and I threw my tea on her. And it was, didn't hurt her or anything like that. Yeah. But I was like, it's like I had to diffuse the situation. And I remember I said, okay, you go to your room. I'm going for a walk. And so I went for a walk with my husband, and I was just talking about like, I don't, what's wrong? Like I'm thinking this is me. And I called Sarah and I was like, what? I need help. I don't understand. Like, why do I get so out of control with Maya and only her? And she said, maybe this isn't about you. She said, what it sounds to me like is when I have clients who come in domestic violence situation and the husband is saying, she just pushes me and pushes me and pushes me until I hit her. And she's like, that's what it sounds like. For some reason, Maya is pushing until people explode. And I was like, okay. Yeah. And so we had worked out a trade for the next day anyway. We had already had that on the schedule, and I was planning on working on one of her kids, but I didn't know which one of my kids she would work on. So I said, okay, well, you work on Maya tomorrow. Well, as I started thinking about it, my husband has family members who have been in domestic violence. I don't want to say who, just in case. And I do too, that have been in that situation. Well, it was generational on both sides. And when we broke that behavior completely changed. Like Maya and I still have our days where we like get frustrated with each other, but that pushing, she doesn't do it anymore at all. And when I think about that, I think what God just saved her of, like what he saved her from, like
what spouse she may have chosen.
Yes.
If that had broken off of her.
Right. Or how she could have pushed somebody who's not aggressive into becoming aggressive because she had this in her cellular makeup. And so once we healed that, it's one of those things where, Sarah and I will often talk about, like, we have these things where we say, if God only healed one thing, and it would all be worth it. And that is the one thing that I'm like, he just saved my daughter from things we can't even imagine could have come from that in the future.
Yeah.
You know
what I love about that is the whole reason I got into Splankna is because my son's whole entire life drastically, undeniably changed in one day, one Splankna session. And if you guys want to hear that story, I just released it last week, the week before this one. But as a mom who desperately wants to be a good mom, desperately wants to show up for her kids, and you just feel like, what is wrong with me? Or what is wrong with my kid? Why are they so mean? Why are they so... And then you do a Splankna session and find out, oh, you're not mean, you're scared. You're like terrified of separating from us. And the Lord shows you this whole story of how they're trying to protect themselves from this thing of fear that's operating in them. It gives you a whole different kind of compassion for your kid and empowers you as a parent. And I just love how you said you thought it was all about you and you were blaming yourself. And I just love that when the Lord gives us like insider tips to what's going on with our families.
Well, and Maya was condemning herself too. Maya was like, I am the problem. Like nobody, like the only person that mom ever gets that mad at is me, or like I cause all these problems. There's something wrong with me. And I was so careful to be like, no, Maya, I'm the adult. I need to control myself. You are just trying to figure out. You're just learning how to engage with people. This is not your fault. And that's still true. Whether it was generational or not, like this, we're going to figure this out. And but the way she was condemning herself would only increase that, because every time something like that would happen, I would come back to Maya and I would apologize and say, and like I said, I never hit her or abused her or anything like that, but she still feels that energy from me, right? And like that, and I am praising God that I never did any of that, given that I had been beaten as a child, that I didn't pass that down. But it was hard sometimes, because you can feel it. And now, she doesn't need to condemn herself. She doesn't need, and this doesn't really have to do generational, but I have to share this. Maya and she's going to be 21 soon. Like last year, we went to this retreat and there was a labyrinth there, and I wanted to experience that with her because I love those. Are you familiar with what that is?
No, I was just going to ask.
It's like a maze. The difference is that the entrance and the exit is the same. But what you do is, in the way I do it, so you start at the beginning, and when you walk in, you imagine that you're walking to this inner sanctum place with Jesus. So as you're walking in, you're letting go of all your worries. You're actively letting go of worries, letting go of anything that blocks you from Jesus. You're praying as you walk in. So Maya and she'd never done it before. So I said, I'll lead you. So I'll be like, okay, so now let's just lay down anything that we're afraid of that keeps us from trusting God. Let's lay down any insecurities. And so I walked her through that. And then you get to the center and you've put everything of the world behind you and you just get to be with Jesus. So I said, now we're in the center. Let's imagine you're just here with Jesus. And I want you to just talk to him, see what he wants to say to you. What do you want to say to him? And like, we're not going to talk. And when you're ready, we'll walk out. And so we just spent this time with Jesus. And then when you walk out, what you do is you take what the Lord gave you in there, and then you ask him to prepare you to enter the world with. So it feels, it's an amazing feeling. Like you just had this cool experience with God, and you're stronger now, and you're asking him to armor you. And like, you can have, I said, like one time I envisioned like the Iron Man armor, like God's just, I'm walking out and he's just armoring me. And then like you get to the end, and then you step out back into the world with all that you gained and what you got from Jesus in the center. And the first time we did it, oh my gosh, Maya loved it. It was amazing. She wanted to do it again. The next day, it was so cold and snowing because we were in the mountains of Colorado. She's like, we have to do it again, Mom. We have to do it again. So we went out and we did it again. This time another friend joined, so I still led them through like kind of how to do it. Normally you wouldn't do that. You just do it on your own. When we were coming out the second time, God told me to stop. Maya and my friend were behind me. He told me to stop at the exit, like, wait a minute. So I just stopped and I waited until he said to step out because they couldn't go around me. And when we walked out, Maya just started crying and hugged me. And she's like, Mom, there's nothing wrong with me. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, God showed me that everything, even my sensitive heart and my crying and everything, he put that in me. He made me like that. And I was like, yeah, Maya, like, that's what I've been telling you. But she needed to hear it from God, I guess. And that's stuck with her. And she just keeps reminding herself, like, God made me this way. And it's okay if people are uncomfortable, if I cry and if I have emotion, because she's the only emotion dominant person in the family. And I was like, yes, Maya, that's exactly it. And the family needed you in this family because you bring that piece. But I think that because she grew up doing Splankna, because she has this idea of God, like that experience was more valuable, and she was more open to hearing God, and she was ready to hear that from the work that we've done over the years, that she was finally able at like 19 to go, wait a minute, I'm created by God and he loves me.
Oh, and she'd been hearing that her whole life. Like, how many people don't understand that until they're 70 or never get to that understanding?
Yeah, it's
like,
so sad.
So grateful. Yeah, like, it's just amazing to hear you talk about your childhood and then to know you now, because literally it's miraculous that you are as healed and whole and invested in people, and the kind of mother you are. Like, trauma and abuse has such an intense way of affecting us. And by worldly standards, without Jesus, it's like you just don't come back from that like you seem to have. And it just gives so much hope to me as a practitioner to sit with people who have walked through the worst of the worst, the unimaginable, heartbreaking stuff, and be like, God can actually redeem all of this in you to the point where you're going out and helping other people find their healing. So these stories and how you're parenting your daughter, it just makes me teary. Breaking off that generational stuff. Like, you are living proof of that. I love that so much.
Thank you. And, I am so thankful to God because I don't know where I would be without him. And I am so thankful that he brought me to Sarah to experience this kind of healing for myself. Because I always, like, when I'm coaching parents, I'm always like, you got to do your own work. And if I hadn't done my own work, I'm in awe of God. I am not in awe of me, because I know that without God, I would not even be where I am today. But like, just looking at my 4 children and the amazing people that they are, and people tell me that all the time. Like, I get letters from their employers, and I get, and it's like, it's not me, it's God. I mean, yes, I partnered with God, but I could never have done this on my own.
Yeah. So let's talk to people who know that they have generational stuff going on. They can look back and they can see alcoholism. They can see maybe a spirit of anger going through their family, or everyone in their family suffers with depression. Like, what are some things that other than those obvious ones, what are some things that can be generational that you see often in your sessions with people? And talk to the person who is wanting to be that cycle breaker. They haven't had someone come before them to break all this stuff up. They want to be that person and they don't know what their first step is.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I would start by saying, I think one of the ways that you can tell if something is generational is, one, if it doesn't make any sense. Like, it doesn't make any sense why I have this poverty mindset. It doesn't make any sense why I can't get past this particular way of thinking or acting or whatever. There could be generational, could also be your own traumas too, but there could be generational. So kind of that way of thinking. Also, when you see the patterns, like you see the pattern of divorce in your family, or betrayal, or obesity, or disease. Like, I broke a generational autoimmune thing off of one person. Addiction, obviously we know that. Just there's so many things. The demo that I did this weekend, the woman, and I didn't know this going into it, but based on, we went back 3 generations, she happened to know that grandmother had lost 5 of her 4 children, 2 at birth, and 1 at 7. I can't remember what she said the other one. And this woman had unimaginable paranoia of her children dying. She could even hear them falling down the stairs, and like, she was just plagued with this constant fear of losing her children. And we got to break that. And that's a good example of cellular memory. Her cells from her grandmother, her DNA was expecting trauma, believing that it was going to happen. All of that cellular memory of losing your child is already in there, And so breaking that for her, oh my gosh, can you imagine when she doesn't have to constantly worry that one of her children's going to die,
Yeah. And before you told her this is generational, I'm sure she was just like, I'm crazy. Why do I have this irrational fear? But I can't make it stop.
Yeah.
Like, we just blame ourselves for things that we have no idea have all these other implications.
And she would probably think, well, I just don't have enough faith. I don't trust God enough. And even other people could condemn her for that. But the fact is, she couldn't control that. Like, I also have that. My grandmother lost 2 of her 5 kids, 1 at birth and 1 shortly after birth. And I've always had a fear of losing my children. And I've had to overcome a lot of paranoia that's come down the bloodline. And I've seen how that has affected some of my children, their own paranoia. And we've worked through a lot of that stuff. It's like you were saying about your son. Like, I'm going to have to go listen to that and hear that story. But since we're on Maya, she gets to be my person for this. When Maya was younger, I dropped the big boys off at the library, and I said to Maya and her little brother Levi, I'm like, we're going to run home and get a snack, and then we'll come right back to the library. Like, we'd been out all day and they needed. She screamed all the way home and threw a tantrum about not getting to go to the library. And I was like, Maya, we're going to go to the library. And like, she was just out of control. So I was like, okay, you know what? Just go to your room. And then I was like, again, venting to my husband, like, because it keeps me from venting to them. And I was just like, I don't know what's wrong with her, because she had been having these outbursts for a while now that didn't seem to make any sense. So I brought Maya into my office and I prayed with her. I said, we're going to do Splankna, Maya, and see what's going on. Well, when we got to talking, and she was probably under 8. So our friend Tom had died, and he's a dad, and they have kids that are the same age as my kids. And I remember that was really scary for her. And then Levi had fallen and hit his head and was bleeding and had stitches. And so I'll give you a little backstory. So she said, Mom, I just keep having these visions and these dreams that you fall and you bunk and you hit your head and you die. And so she's being tormented with these visions that probably came generationally, because that's how my brain works. But I had no idea that was going on for her, and that she was having these bad dreams. Every night she's having these nightmares that I die or that her dad dies. And so I felt horrible for even being upset with her. And
Right.
so we cleared some emotions, and I prayed with her, and the bad dreams stopped. And that wasn't generational, although I think the generational made her vulnerable to nightmares because I always had nightmares. But yeah, and then all of that stopped. So like her behavior was a result of something that was going on. And I've had all these reminders over the years of like, there's always a reason behind something, and figuring out what that reason is to help them, you know, because she felt so much better. She just like, I was like, and I got to speak to her like, mommy's not going to die. God is protecting us. You know, Levi didn't die when he hit his head, you know, but
Yeah.
that was a scary, scary time for her.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I want to ask you some questions from a practitioner standpoint. So, like, for the practitioners who have been trained in this is like, it doesn't come up as often, at least for me. I don't know if that's for everybody, but can you really quickly go through the difference between like, sometimes it's a stronghold, but sometimes it's a generational stronghold versus a generational agreement. Like, do we need to know really the difference between those, or do we just know it's a stronghold and that's what we referred to it, and we know that one comes with a benefit, but like, what does that mean practically?
Well,
As far as like, you know, how some of them come with like a sin, or
I think the most important thing to understand about the stronghold, what makes the stronghold different, is that your client actually bought into it. They agreed to it. So like, if there was a curse that was causing them to feel paranoid and have bad dreams, they never bought into it. It's easy to pray off. We just like break that curse off of the family. If it's a stronghold, they agreed with this, and so they need to repent of that, and they need to let go of that and break that generational thing from impacting them. So strongholds have a buy-in, like the client, maybe they experienced something in their life, or maybe there was a bigger reason why they bought into it, but they actually bought into that too, and so they have a buy-in. Where a curse is something that's brought onto the bloodline because of a sin done in the family. So if you had an ancestor who was very violent and murdered somebody, and it brought a curse onto that relative, and then that's been passing down through the bloodline, and it doesn't even have to be that severe. Like a curse can come. We don't look into where the curse came. We just know that the curse came from an ancestor who committed a sin. Sometimes the clients know. We all sin, but like more severe.
yeah,
And we don't look into that. We don't go, well, what did your ancestor do? Because we don't think that that's appropriate. We just need to know that there was a sin that brought a curse on the bloodline. And the emotions tell us how that curse is impacting them. And then we just pray and we break that curse. And honestly, I think with that curse, we probably, because it's a curse and there's no buy-in, it's usually breaks off of many people in the bloodline. It breaks off of everyone. So a curse is something that's from that ancestor that's been affecting the bloodline, probably the epigenetics, just like that, the mouse thing that I told you earlier.
yeah,
And so,
yeah. So
and so a
something
curse is that. An
hear.
agreement is where somebody in the bloodline made an agreement, either over the bloodline or just like then something they agreed for that they thought would protect themselves or protect everyone else or whatever. And so again, we don't need to know what that ancestor agreed for, because the emotions that are in emotions are going to tell us how that's impacting them. So it's really simple. Like, Lord God, I confess that my ancestor brought this curse on the family, and I ask you to break it. It brings anger and resentment and unforgiveness into the bloodline. And and so we break that curse off and take all that came with it and get rid of it.
And how specific do you think you have to get? Like, if I say, tell me what you know about your ancestor 5 generations ago, no one's going to have any idea half the time.
Well, and
so
yeah,
is it just that? Is it just like it has to do with anger and resentment and holding grudges against people and isolation, and that's about as close as you need to get to it?
Well, if it's 5 generations, it was also your mom or your dad. So you might see how it plays out in them. So you don't have to go back that far. You just say, how do you see anger playing out in your parents, the parent that we're working on? Because we would ask if it's mom's side or dad's side. So we want to get as much information as we can by asking what they know about the bloodline. But if someone was like adopted and they don't know anything about their birth mother, we can still get this done based on the emotions. So I try to like dialogue with them and say, okay, so we're like, let's say you were working on Maya and paranoia came up, and you would say, so tell me about paranoia in your family. And she'd say, well, I've struggled with this and my mom struggled with this. I don't know about the people before us, but I definitely know we have. And then that's, and be like, okay, that's enough. We don't really want to get too detailed because that feels like special knowledge and unnecessary. We just
So you don't have to know about like, oh, this is paranoia around safety. This is paranoia around finances. You can just
sometimes.
know. Okay.
Sometimes you will. Sometimes you will. That's what I was telling the people this weekend that we were training. I'm like, sometimes you do, like, you're going to see, let's say yearning is your benefit for the stronghold. And so is this just a stronghold of always yearning for something? What is the something? Is it yearning for love? Is this a stronghold of poverty that's in your bloodline? So the more questions you can ask and they know, because like with this woman that I did the demo on, it was, her great grandmother. And I had to ask where the bloodline, and found out it was her dad, then her grandfather, then her great grandmother. Well, her grandfather was the one who was the only survivor of the 5 kids. And so she happened to know that about her grandmother. And so that's how we figured out what this was, based on what she knew, but not everybody does. And so we would have just known. But what I would have said is, oh, paranoia, where do you see that in your life? She would have said, oh, with my kids. And so we still would have been able to get it done had she not known that about her grandmother or great grandmother. But it was kind of cool that she did, and we could see what God was doing.
Okay.
Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, that's really good. Because sometimes I'm like, I get a little lost on like how much of this story do we have to know, or can we just renounce it and know that it came down through the bloodline and we can just pray it off? Can you also refresh everybody, how many generations do generational things go back?
Well, they could go back all the way to Adam and Eve. I find that most of the work we do is, I personally don't ever get, or I stay under 10 generations most of the time. That's what I'm working on. But there has been times where I'm like, oh my gosh, this went back 25 generations. And if you think like people have children typically in their 20s, let's say the average is 25, then 10 generations is 250 years ago. It's like, wow, that's crazy. Like what was happening 250 years ago? And like sometimes it has been like, this was probably around the time that my family came to America. And, or it sometimes you kind of know based on like the time frame of what was happening in the world around that time. I did have one person who we were working on a generational thing, and she said, what came to my mind when I was holding that point was KKK. And I said, oh, like, you think somebody in your family was in the KKK? And I said, do you know that they were? And she said, no. Well, I'm not going to test that. I'm not going to say, is that? I just say, well, since that came to your mind, that could be something that happened. And then we just hold it like that. But you're not going to muscle test, like, was your family involved in the KKK? Just say, oh, that's interesting.
If you're feeling a little lost, you could kind of test through, like, let's say yearning is coming up as a benefit. You could muscle test through different general categories and be like, where can we get more specific with this? Is it yearning for this or that? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Because there's very many different things you could be yearning for, or deprived. If you had deprivation, like, are you deprived of relationships? Are you deprived of food? Are you deprived of finances? Like, what do you feel? Or is it just emotional deprivation, like never feeling connected to anyone?
Yep. Okay. So if you guys are doing a session and you're like, man, what are we working on? And the client isn't connecting, not getting those bubbles of thoughts rising up, you can just test through different, or listening prayer, ask the Lord and see if anything comes to your mind for, like, deprived of what, yearning for what. I'm going to close it with this. This is just an introduction to generational trauma. But if you are hearing this and you're like, man, I think I have something generational going on in my family. I can see the patterns. I can see where things don't make sense. It's irrational. You can bring that to a Splankna practitioner and say, I think I have something generational going on. And just know that you don't have to know if it's generational or not. The Lord will make that clear in a Splankna session. It could be generational, it could be something else, but just, I don't want you to feel the pressure like you have to know that this is generational. Really, you can just take that thing. If it's divorce, if it's paranoia, you can bring it to a Splankna session, and the Lord will be so faithful to direct that session. And if it is generational, he'll bring you there. But if it's not, he'll bring you to the root of it anyway, and you don't really have to worry about it. This kind of deep dive is just for the people who like to wrap their heads around what's going on. How does this stuff get passed down? But if you have no idea the root of it, that's okay. You can still bring that to the Lord. So, Heather, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about generational stuff. I'm guessing this is a brand new concept for a lot of people. I know it was for me when I came to training. I want to thank you guys for being here and listening, and stay tuned, stick around, because next week we're going to release the episode of Heather coming back and talking about addiction, which is a Splankna protocol that the Lord showed her very, very closely, very, very intimately in her life, walked her through the very steps of how to break someone out of an addiction pattern on a spiritual level, on an emotional level, physical level, all of it. So thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.